Every voice matters. Blue Lift is a podcast dedicated to address the issues that affect all of us, with engaging discussions with progressive thought leaders and experts as guests. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to Blue Lift. Really excited to be with y'all today. I don't know where you're at and what the weather's like, but this week, while we're taping this in Tennessee, it's really cold today. Last week, it was really warm. So, you know, we get all the seasons in 1 week here in Tennessee sometimes. Wow, it's been a week, hasn't it? It feels like it's been 6 months, but it's really only been about 3 weeks. So if you know, you know. I'm really excited about our guest today. You guys, we have Jared Sullivan with us, and we're going to talk about a fantastic book that Jared has written that's getting a lot of great reviews and really selling a lot of copies. Jared has written for The Atlantic, Guardian Gun, Oxford American, The New Yorker, and Time, among other many other publications. He was formerly an editor for Men's Journal and a Field and Stream, and he lives in Franklin, Tennessee with his beautiful family. And so we're so excited to have him here. First, let's go ahead and give the book a plug. It's called Valley So Low. And it is like a John Grisham fiction novel, except it's nonfiction. It's really true. Everything in it is true. And the cover says, "One lawyer's fight for justice in the wake of America's great coal catastrophe." And we're going to talk about that, of course. Jared, welcome to Blue Lift.
Peggy, I am so delighted to be here. Thank you for having me on. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. This book is something else, Jared. I have to tell you, I'm so impressed by the depth of the research, but also the personal touches. Because much like, you know, a fiction book, we get to know and love the characters. I mean, some of them we don't love by the end, but we certainly get to know them.
You know them at least.
Yeah, we know them. Yeah. And I mean, you even go into their family life, some of their history, their health issues. I love that. I just love that it reads like a really good novel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's dive in and talk about what the book is really about. And I think we have to start with this question. First of all, let's give just a scant history of the TVA, which stands for Tennessee Valley Authority. Tell us briefly what that is, when it was formed, and why.
Yeah, okay. That's a great place to start. The Tennessee Valley was one of my favorite things to research in this whole process. I spent 5 years writing and reporting the book, and I could have, I'm not sure if you would want to read it, but I could have easily written a whole book just on TVA because it is a fascinating organization. Basically, it was the brainchild of Franklin Roosevelt. It was a cornerstone of this New Deal program. So, you know, obviously the Great Depression started in 1929. Roosevelt was elected in 1932, took office in 1933. And what happened was that FDR, as a young man, he contracted polio, and so he would drive from New York State to Warm Springs, Georgia, for treatment. And on the way, he passed through the Tennessee Valley, which the Tennessee Valley, it's Tennessee, but also touches parts of 6 neighboring states: Virginia, North Carolina, down to Mississippi. It's I think 42,000 square miles, and that's a huge part of the Southeast, basically. So when I say the word Tennessee Valley, it's basically the Southeast. So, like I said, Franklin Roosevelt contracted polio and drove through this area for treatment, and so he knew that this area was in bad shape, to say the least. In 1933, the year he took office, the median income, per capita median income, was not even half of the national average in the Tennessee Valley. The average person earned the equivalent of $6,000 a year in today's money. I mean, imagine trying to raise a family or live on $6,000 a year. I mean, people here had nothing.
And it was so, since they were already so down, then after the stock market collapsed, this area just couldn't recover.
No, it couldn't, and it was a really hopeless, dire situation, and it was so bleak that there was even some concern that there could be like a populist uprising, because the Bolshevik revolution hadn't been that many years earlier. And so there was real concern of like, we, on the national level, we have to do something for these people. And there's also like a test of democracy, right? It was really an open question whether democracy could care for all of its people, whether democracy could meet the needs of its people, and whether the American experiment had vitality. And FDR set out to prove that yes, like democracy can meet all the needs of its people. So he his genius idea was to create the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a quasi-governmental agency that had three big goals. It was to produce power, because the only 3% of farms at that time in the Tennessee Valley had electricity, and it's hard to grow your economy if you don't have power, right? The other one was to control the Tennessee River, which is, I think it's the 5th largest river in the United States, something like that. Well, it flooded regularly in the 1870s. It totally devastated the city of Chattanooga. It also regularly flooded like other towns. It's hard to develop as a society if your town's getting washed away every dozen years or so, right? And then the third one was to help farmers better crop yields. People here were not practicing efficient farming techniques, and millions of acres of land were eroded. And so that was a big one. So those are the three main goals of TVA. And so once Congress passed TVA, the TVA Act of 1933, FDR signed it into law. TVA got to work fast. They hired an army of 40,000 men in the middle of the Great Depression, started throwing up these hydroelectric dams all up and down the Tennessee Valley, and that was again to control flooding, but also 39 of these dams end up producing electricity, and that really helped create like the bedrock of our economy here in Tennessee and the Tennessee Valley. So, and incomes shot up very, very quickly over the next few decades. So TVA really was a miracle. It was good government in action.
And I like the way in the book you quote, I guess it was Roosevelt, who said that TVA would be described as a corporation clothed with the power of government, but possessed of the flexibility and initiative of a private enterprise. And so and so the plan was, the TVA would be a government entity, however, it would act like a business. And then some years later, the government decided to have less and less control over TVA, and that's when the true business end took over, and that might be when a lot of the problems started.
Yeah, exactly. So TVA initially had all these like kind of like utopian side projects. Like it had like a library service, it had a planned city called Norris, it had a ceramics laboratory. All that stuff after World War II basically got scrapped. And when Eisenhower became president, he did not like TVA. He accused it of being quote creeping socialism. He wanted to sell it off for parts, but what ended up happening was he basically cut TVA loose, because TVA after World War II, there was this huge demand for the electricity demand went up and up and up afterwards, and the hydroelectric dams were not enough. So TVA started building these 11 of the world's largest coal-fired power plants, and they were expensive. And Congress and Eisenhower kept denying TVA the needed funds it needed to build these things. So they basically let TVA self-finance its operations through the sale of bonds, and in doing so, basically stopped giving TVA money, stopped giving it appropriations, and that's basically the state of what TVA is today. It still has all like many of the protections of a government agency. It's not responsible to shareholders. It can use eminent domain as it wants to build projects, but it also doesn't really have any oversight from Congress either, which is a huge problem. And it's in need of desperate need of reform as I go into the book. And that's kind of why it's like this. Now it's this Frankenstein organization where it's kind of a company, kind of a federal agency, and doesn't really do a great job of being either. It's not really a great company and not really a great federal agency,
Right.
which is a problem.
Yeah, and it seems like as I read the book, I noticed that they used their government ties when it was convenient, but then they
Sure.
used their assertions that we're an independent corporation when it was convenient. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So the thing that really, so that the listeners can know, so what is this book about? Well, this book is
Sure.
about a horrible incident that happened in 2018, right?
2008.
2008. Oh, I've lost a decade. I'm old. Decades mean nothing to me. 2008. So that's right, 2008. And so it was a coal ash. I guess some people call it a spill. I don't know that it really spilled out, but one of the first things you learn in the book is what is coal ash? Well, you learn that. And so it's just like if you're barbecuing on your grill and you've got coal in there, then briquettes, there's ash at the bottom. And imagine that times the biggest number you can possibly think of. And all of that is the result of using coal to make power. And so you have this ash left over and it has to go somewhere. And, just to be very basic about where it was going basically into a low piece of land, which they kind of called, I guess, a pool or a pond.
Yeah, they call it a pond, which is not accurate at all.
Yeah.
It's a hole in the ground that maybe was originally in the shape of a pond, but no, it became a mountain that was 6 stories tall. The one in Kingston I write about, in 84 acres large. It was 1 billion gallons. And,
so I want everybody to hear what he said. 6 stories tall and 84 acres big. Around. So it was like a visible mountain, essentially. And even marathon runners would train on it by running up and down it. I mean, it was just extremely visible. And TVA made sure that it looked nice and grassy as well. So they were even, planting grass seeds on it. So it would just look like this beautiful green mound, and people might drive by and think, oh, that's nice. Well, underneath the grass facade was brewing a lot of trouble, and water, had seeped in over the years. This thing was like jelly, basically. And when it broke loose, and it was, I envisioned it in my mind. It must have sort of looked like lava flowing down, but
that's probably right. Yeah, that's probably
but
close
chunky,
to it.
Right? Pretty chunky and.
So what happened in December of 2008 in the middle of the night? This big mound collapsed, and it was by volume the largest environmental disaster in U.S. history. I guess depending on how you measure it. It fortunately did not kill anyone, but it's something crazy, like 100 times larger than Exxon Valdez, just in terms of the sheer amount of material that was released on the landscape. It covered 300 acres in the middle of the night. It damaged almost 30 homes. People got trapped inside their houses. Homes got shoved off their foundations and basically got kind of collapsed by this wave of sludge. Yeah, it's like lava. It's like this black wave of sludge that spewed out, and some of it was really soupy and wet, but some of it was also like big chunks too. The consistency there was different kind of consistencies of it, right? And that's where my book picks up. We started this conversation with a kind of a long bit about TVA, but my book is really, I try to write like a character-driven story, because I feel like at the end of the day, that's what people really care about. I didn't want to write like a wonky policy book about TVA or even a history. I wanted to write about real people who are affected by this disaster. So my book starts the night of this big disaster, where this worker, Ansel Clark, he's a Teamster who lives in the Knoxville area. He gets a phone call at like 4 or 5 in the morning saying, we've had a big disaster down here. We need you to come help clean this stuff up. And it was 2008, so the economy was on its knees. Lots of people were out of work, and union reps started working the phones, calling all these blue collar folks from not just from Tennessee, but from around the country, saying, we need you to come to Tennessee, to Kingston, Tennessee, which is outside Knoxville, about 30 minutes outside Knoxville. We need you to come here and start cleaning this stuff up. We have a huge mess. And so 900 people from across the country descend on the site, and they are very, very glad to get this phone call, because like I said, they really needed to work a lot. Most of them had kids. Many of them were caring for,
Oh
elderly
yeah, it
parents.
was. I mean, these jobs were a godsend to these families who they had
Exactly,
not been
exactly.
getting enough work, and so they all show up and they begin on the cleanup. And you paint some stories in here that just really sort of have an effect on the reader. I'm an animal lover, so when you talk
Mhm.
about this stuff was so thick and gooey and messy that you actually had, birds who would be flopping around in it. And there were other larger animals in it that were, humanely euthanized right there on site because it was clear they were not going to be able to get them out of this sludge. It turned vehicles over. I mean, it was powerful and thick and difficult. But then the cleanup had to ensue. And so the waterways
Yep.
that it had gone into needed to be cleaned up. And then obviously just this, it came inside people's homes and whatnot. And, so as these workers begin to work, it becomes obvious to really everyone that there were some toxins in all of this stuff. And as it dried out, the dust began to get everywhere. But the workers were told, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. You can eat a pound of it a day and you'll be okay. That's what they would
I mean, not
joke
just
and tell them.
exactly. And it wasn't just, I mean, the word, it was also the public was told the same thing.
True.
I mean, I went and found in news coverage where TVA got its PR people in front of news cameras, and they said the same thing. They said, in not so many words, this poses no significant health threat. That's what they said over and over. Don't worry about it. Yes, this stuff is gross. Yes, we've made a big mess, but it poses no substantial threat to the community. And that's what the workers heard, and they really believe that. Then their managers on the job site reiterated very similar comments, saying as you mentioned, one contractor in particular said you could eat a pound of fly ash a day and be fine. He later kind of like in court added some caveats to what he meant and tried to explain himself. But the workers basically took that to mean, though, that the stuff was not did not pose any risk. But that quickly, so the workers were pushing themselves hard. They were in many cases working 16 hours a day, and it's by choice, partly because they could get really, really good overtime hours. So they were going like crazy. I talked to one worker who slept in his truck because he didn't want to drive home and the hours were so long. He's like, I might as well sleep in my truck and then get up next morning and go back to work. And so they after the first few months, this stuff is really this coal ash sludge is really soupy at first. It's not really in the air much, but then after the first year or so, it starts to dry out, and that's when the workers start really starting to feel bad. And at first, they tell themselves, "Oh, I'm just pushing myself too hard. I'm just overdoing it, basically." But then they start passing out in their trucks, and they start coughing up blood.
Well,
Then,
and they even have
eh,
like boils on their skin. I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah, and it's
bad.
hard. Yeah, I mean, this stuff, it becomes very apparent eventually that this coal ash stuff is harming them. So and that's kind of where my book kind of follows that.
Well, and I think really for me the crux of the story is then the way the cover up begins to happen. I mean, they were not allowed to wear masks because that would look bad if the public saw the workers in masks. Oh my goodness, then the public would think, why are they wearing a mask? Is there something wrong with all this stuff that's all over town? Um,
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, and TV had just gotten all their PR people in front of the camera saying this stuff is fine. Well, if you have people out there in hazmat suits, that really
right.
undercuts the claim that all this stuff is not hazardous. That was part of it. TVA was also under the gun from the EPA to get this stuff cleaned up fast. And if they had given the workers hazmat suits, which in my view they should have, the workers would have had to, Tennessee's hot in the summer, right? As everyone knows. If these workers had hazmat suits, they would have had to get on like shuttles, taken the shuttles out of the job site, derobed, gotten cleaned off, had their break, then put their hazmat suits back on, take a shuttle back to the job site, and it would have just slowed the whole process up. And TVA didn't really have time to do that. So I think I suspect that they were just like, we can't take this long. We have to.
I mean, I think
I think the evidence is pretty clear. I think the evidence is pretty clear. That's probably what.
Yeah, that's what was driving the whole issue.
Mm-hmm.
One of the sections of the book, and I don't want to give away all of it because I want the readers to get the book. And by the way, get it from your favorite local bookstore. You do not have to get it from that thing on your computer. We have lots of great bookstores, and they all have the book. So find your favorite local bookstore, go in and order it from them if they don't have it in stock. But one of the stories in the book that really, to me, just drives home the fact that this was essentially a conspiracy to defraud these workers of the money they were owed and also to deny any responsibility at all on TVA's part, is that there were little gizmos that the workers would put on their bodies to check the air quality. And so this monitor, and I'm really simplifying this. Jared does a much better job in the book.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Yeah.
This is exactly it.
And it's supposed to monitor the air quality. Well, interestingly, the attorneys were able to show that they noticed, wow, it looks like these things are just on random days. This air monitoring is just on random days. Well, come to find out, the days weren't random at all. They were days when there had been rain or was rain. And what does rain do? Well, it was keeping all the dust down. And therefore, these air quality checks that they claimed were supposed to be checking the quality, those were rigged. I mean, the word rigged has taken on a whole new meaning in our society now, but that actually was a rigging for sure. And so even that is just a perfect example of how they really looked for ways not to take responsibility for the health issues of these workers. And when we're talking about health issues, we're talking everything from a minor issue to death, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so 50 of the Kingston workers have now died, and hundreds are ill. And it was preventable. Like even a simple dust mask would have really helped. Like in 95. Yeah, I mean, I think they probably should have been in hazmat suits, and experts agree. But yeah, I mean that's exactly it. So my book, my book follows this lawyer in Knoxville by the name of Jim Scott, and
who we really come to care about in the book. We really start caring about him.
Yeah, he's a knucklehead. I really enjoyed getting to know him. He means very, very well. He is he's a personal injury attorney in Knoxville, and he basically wrecked his whole life to pursue this case. So let me back up a little bit. So around 2013, the workers realize there's no denying that the coal ash is making them sick, right?
And their families. It's not just them it's making sick. Some of them have little kids who are getting sick by what the dad is bringing home on his clothes and whatnot.
Yes. Yeah. So they become very worried. So they get in contact with this local lawyer named Jim Scott, who has this humble little office in like a strip mall in Knoxville and Kingston Pike. He meets with them. He's very skeptical at first, as any kind of personal injury attorney usually is, because personal injury attorneys, they finance their own cases out of their own pockets. So skepticism comes with the territory. But then Jim starts meeting with all these workers one-on-one and realizes, oh, I think there's something really going on here. So he spends the next 10 years of his life dragging their case through federal court. And TVA, you talked about the corporation closed. What was it? Corporation closed with the power of the government. I forget the exact quote. You can't. As a result of that, the workers couldn't sue TVA directly, so they ended up suing this company called Jacobs Engineering, which was TVA's like safety contractor on the job site. And I should say TVA and Jacobs both denied that they did anything wrong during all of this. In the dispute parts of my book, but I stand by my reporting. So the case ends up being against Jacobs Engineering, and it takes 10 years, and it was a really brutal process. I didn't quite realize how companies win in cases like this. Like we all know, it's not a shocker to say, like companies, people with all the money come out ahead in situations like this. That's not a shock to anyone, but I guess I didn't really understand how exactly they do that until I reported this book. It's a very clear playbook.
They just wear you down.
Exactly. And they have all the money in the world to wear, and they can hire very good lawyers, very talented, smart lawyers who are likable. And if they pay them a couple $1 million to drag this out for years, that's like no big deal to them, because
right.
a couple $1 million, it's like whatever to them. They want to big companies, they want to avoid like catastrophic damages, basically. They want to avoid the $1 billion judgments against them, so they're happy to pay whatever a couple $1 million to some sharp lawyers to defend them in court. So they drag it out, and they basically just make it where you have to capitulate. I draw parallels in my book between the Kingston disaster and the Exxon Valdez disaster, partly because because Jacobs Engineering hired the same attorney who litigated the Exxon Valdez case.
Right.
The big oil spill in Alaska. His name is Jim Sanders. He's an attorney and he lives in Nashville. Apparently, he's very, very likable. He did not speak to me for this.
Oh,
book.
wow! So he would not talk to you for the book.
No. I had to spend a week on LinkedIn figuring out people who used to work with him and calling them up and asking them to tell me things about him. And that's how I got a lot of the details about him from the book. I also found an interview he gave for some like law textbook, basically. So I feel like I got a decent understanding of him in the book. I painted, I think, a fairly decent portrait of him. But he's apparently really, really likable. And but the name of the game is just to drag it out, and you appeal everything. You fight every single emotion as if it's life or death. And you just make it as hard as possible. So you drag it out, and then the workers basically have to capitulate because they're getting so sick, and they're getting so desperate for money to help cover their medical bills. They just have to finally say, we will take whatever, because we have to get this done. We can't wait around for another decade for a settlement. And that's very, very similar thing happened with the Exxon Valdez case too, with the Alaska fishermen whose livelihoods were wrecked by the big oil spill out there. Something very, very similar.
Well, and yes, and one of the parts of the book that I don't want to give away completely, but there was even talk of, can this company even be sued at all? And that was a win, for the whole case, was to even actually have a case. So just so the listeners will know, how much
Sure.
in the end did each family get?
I think it was, I haven't talked about my book in a minute. I think it's $77.5 million. So for a group of 230 plaintiffs, so it ended up being, it kind of varied from case to case, but ended up being a couple $100,000 each on average for the 230 workers who ended up hanging on to the lawsuit for these 10 years. The lawyers, they created like a system to divide up the settlement. If you were based on your illness, like if your spouse died, you got more money, and if you just had relatively more minor illnesses, you got a little less. But on average, about a couple $100,000 each, which after a decade of waiting is not much. It's not life-changing money. These poor people were not in it to get rich. I got to know this woman named Janie Clark, I mentioned Ansel earlier. He's the one who got my book opens with him. He's the one who got the phone call in the early morning, the day the disaster happened, saying, come out here. I followed Janie his wife throughout the whole book, and got to know her very well. I kind of secretly think she's maybe the main character of the book.
I do too.
Yeah, she means a great deal to me. And I mean, just to say the least, like $200,000 did not make up for all the damage that spill wrecked on her life.
No. I love the way the book also sort of lets us in on the real love between Janie and Ansel, and how much she truly cared for him in so many ways, and made sure that he was always happy going to work and well fed and all of that. But in this case, there was really nothing she could do to protect him because he was out there trying to make some money for the family while he had the chance. I think the one other part of the book that I wanted us to talk about a little bit is really the lack of checks and balances on this organization as this whole thing is unfolding, as the cleanup is beginning and all of this is unfolding. We see time after time that there were people who tried to raise the red flag and say, something's not right here. These workers are literally coughing up black goo, right? And that's not normal. But when they would say a little bit too much, when it came time to, let's say TVA would say, well, the cleanup's going pretty well. We don't need as many people now. Those people who complained were the first ones to go. So it was really an orchestrated effort. If you're going to say too much, you're not going to be around. You're not going to keep this job. We're going to rig the air quality test. You can't wear a mask. That'll look bad and affect our public image. I mean, everything was really stacked up against these folks, and it's just a horrible injustice. And, my question to you is, if this were to happen today, do we have enough stopgaps in place? Maybe I should ask this question. If this happened 6 months ago, do we have enough stopgaps in place to keep this from happening? And then certainly in today's political environment, we don't even know if the EPA is going to survive. Are they even going to exist? Who's going to watch out for workers and stop this kind of thing from happening?
No, I mean, no one looks out for workers. And that came as a shock to many of the workers themselves. Like, where wasn't the EPA on site during all this? Like, why didn't they say anything? And the EPA was on site, but I found transcripts where EPA people are telling. I found these transcripts from public meetings where EPA people are basically regurgitating TVA talking points. And it's hard to exactly know what happened. These EPA people wouldn't speak with me. It seems like regulatory capture, or the EPA trusted TVA too much, deferred to them too much, didn't have enough people on staff. It's hard to know exactly what happened, but it's safe to say the EPA was asleep at the wheel. It was ultimately their job to make sure TVA was keeping these people safe, and it just didn't happen.
And how about OSHA?
Huge. Similar deal. OSHA. People did rate. I mean, I found documents like people for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service initially in 2008 when this happened were raising concerns of oh, isn't coal ash really hazardous, and isn't there all sorts of radionuclides in the river from Oak Ridge upstream that these workers are sucking out of the river now with this coal ash? So people within the federal government did raise alarm. I have the documents, but the TVA was basically like, no, don't worry about it. It's fine. We're running tests. All our tests show there's no substantial hazard. And so TVA really relied throughout the cleanup on in my view, and the view of the workers' attorneys, very faulty data to try to downplay the hazards at that site.
Well,
so if it happened 6 months ago, go ahead.
It's really disturbing because there were several organizations that should have been watching out for the workers as well as the environment around the area. I mean, you mentioned the radioactive stuff coming from the nuclear plant. So I think my understanding is a lot of that stuff that had gotten into the water, they didn't want to disturb it and stir it back up again. So they avoided that by essentially just kind of packing this stuff down real tight, and that was sort of their answer for that.
Yeah, so Oak Ridge, where they made the atomic bomb and where they still make enriched uranium for atomic bombs, is about 20 miles upstream. And it's well documented that there's radionuclides all in the bottom of the Tennessee and the Clinch River from that plant, because back in the 40s there was a lot of dumping going on. That's not a secret. That's absolutely a matter of public record.
Right.
And so TVA, it's well known. TVA and federal agencies know this. So when the Kingston disaster happened, all this coal ash stuff rushed into the river and commingled with this this radioactive stuff on the bottom of the river. And so TVA left, I think it was like, I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of tons of coal ash on the bottom of the river because they deemed it was too hazardous to try to suck up out of the river because it would have exposed the workers to to these harms. But the workers allege, and there's evidence that the workers did in fact suck up some of these radioactive hazards from the river and were exposed to them.
Well, and
which is so it was like the coal ash stuff would have been hazardous enough, right? Like the coal ash itself coal ash is full of arsenic, it's full of beryllium and silica, it's full of stuff you absolutely do not want to breathe. But not only that, it got mixed in with this radioactive waste that made it even worse. So it was really, I think Jim Scott, the lawyer in the book, he calls like a Long Island iced tea of poison, and I think that's a pretty accurate description of the substances there at Kingston.
Yeah, and it's that is good description. I think, when I think back about this and I think about these families and I think about these men who are out doing this work, and at some point, I believe most of them figured out this is not healthy. This is not good for my health. But many of them were in positions where it didn't matter. They had to keep working. They had to get that money while they could because jobs were not plentiful at that time. And they had to keep working, and they did. And of course, that doesn't relieve anybody of the responsibility that they had. And I really appreciate the way in the book that you tell the story and we learn all about the legal machinations that go on, but it's not boring the way you tell it. So you do a good job with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I try not to get too much in the weeds. It's either kind of like you like legal procedures or you don't, and I like them. I think that's the kind of stuff's interesting. But yeah, I tried to keep it pretty top level, the legal stuff.
Yeah, but again, I mean, you do a real good job of painting the picture that, okay, this is a Goliath that they're up against, and Goliath just wants to delay. So just to kind of go back to the beginning, because I forgot to ask you this question early on, and I know some of the answer, but tell the listeners, what in the world made you decide to get interested in this topic and write this book?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, I grew up in Tennessee. I grew up in Franklin. I went to school at UTC. So I remember when this disaster happened. I was a senior in high school, and I remember watching TV. I remember TVA people coming on camera saying this stuff is fine. So jump ahead 10 years. I was an editor at Men's Journal magazine in New York, and part of my job as an editor is to find stories. That's editors. Yes, they look for typos and mistakes, but really their job is to find stories and to send writers to go report stories. And I started reading these compelling, and I kept a close eye on the South because I'm from here. Especially close eye on Tennessee. So I started reading these dispatches from this excellent reporter, Jamie Satterfield, in the Knoxville News Sentinel, which is Knoxville's local daily paper, about this lawsuit that had finally reached trial. And I've read these compelling court dispatches. I thought, oh gosh, this is interesting. And I, of course, remembered the Kingston disaster from when I was in high school. So I happened to be in Knoxville the Christmas of 2018, visiting my little sister, and there was a ceremony commemorating the 10-year anniversary of the disaster. And I kind of went on a lark, like, oh, maybe this will be a story I could assign to someone. So I went, I met many of the workers who ended up becoming central figures in the book. I thought, you know what? No, this is a story I want to tackle. I think I could tell this. This is a Tennessee story. And so I spent the next, 8 months writing a really long magazine story for Men's Journal that ran about 7,000 words, which is long. And I left so much on the cutting room. The case wasn't resolved, and I left so much on the cutting room floor. I was like, I'm gonna keep going with this. I want to turn this into a book. So I kept working on it, and then in 2020, when the pandemic came, I got laid off. For the whole magazine I worked at got laid off, and I had a 6-month-old child at the time. So I thought, oh, it's a good time not to live in New York City right now. So me and my wife, we came back to Franklin and lived in my parents' barn behind their house for a year. And I basically just kept reporting. And the pandemic benefited me in the sense that Jim Scott, the lawyer, had nothing to do really, or relatively little to do. So he had a lot of time to talk on the phone with me. So we spent especially that spring of 2020 when everyone was locked down, we spent every night on the phone for hours talking about this case. And the book would have been really hard to complete if I didn't have those big chunks of time with him. And yeah, I kept going. It took me 5 years in all to finish, and it came out in October of 2024. And I'm very glad it's out there and people know. And the reason I wrote it, my book's very, very critical of TVA as we've just, as we've kind of touched on. But I also think TVA's history is so amazing. It really did benefit the people of the Tennessee Valley in really real ways. It was good government in action. It was progressive policies that really meaningfully benefited a very conservative part of the country that might not otherwise be open to normally be open to such actions by the government.
Well, and
it
did work.
Did work. So I want TVA to be reformed. There's people out there who want to burn TVA to the ground, and that's not me. I want it to be reformed so it could be as dynamic and innovative as it was during the FDR era. Because we need it to be. We need it to produce abundant clean energy for this region. To reduce our emissions, but also our state economy would really benefit if we had cheap, clean energy. This whole region still has higher poverty rates, lower per capita income than the rest of the country. We still have a long way to go in terms of our economic development, and TVA could benefit this region if we had cheaper power. So I am rooting for TVA despite all of its many flaws.
Yeah.
I think it needs more oversight. I think, to say the least, definitely needs more oversight. But I don't think liberals, progressives should give up on TVA.
Well, I don't either. And aren't they now? My understanding, I think I read they're starting back construction on another nuclear power plant. Is that right?
We'll see. They're like these power plants take forever to build. So a little context: TVA in the '60s wanted to build 7 giant nuclear power plants, but because of cost overruns and because of some near disasters, their Brownsbury plant in North Alabama almost caught fire and had to be shut down in the spot, or it did catch fire rather, and it cost millions of dollars of damages. That was the most notable kind of safety disaster at this nuclear plant. They've had several other smaller incidences that have caused the plants to be shut down. So as a result of this, they only built 3 of their plants out of the 7 power plants, which is a real shame because, man, we could really use those power plants today with all the people that are moving to the Sun Belt, and now TVA is not meeting energy needs of its people. We had this big winter storm, I guess it was 4 weeks ago here in Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
And TVA had to buy power from other power systems, or we would have had brownouts or blackouts. So TVA it's ill-equipped now for the number of people that live here. And yeah, it needs to build more power plants, but they're expensive. So yes, it's exploring the idea of whether to build more nuclear plants, but it's hard. These projects take a long time. This is kind of wonky, but TVA, in 1979, Congress capped how much debt we had to take on, and they capped it at $30 billion, which is a big number. Well, now TVA is $20 billion in debt, so they have $10 billion of wiggle room to finance new projects. Well, you can't really build a nuclear power plant with only $10 billion.
No.
So to TVA, Congress needs to change the TVA's debt limit and make it where it adjusts for inflation, because that $30 billion debt limit has been in place since like I said, 1979. Well, if you adjusted that for inflation now, I think it would be, what would that be? I just did some math real fast. If you adjusted that, it would be $140 billion today. So I think TVA's debt limit should at least be expanded to that so they could finance more nuclear and clean energy projects.
Which would actually, help generations, far, far down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the whole idea of TVA and what all it did for this area and what it should be and could be is a really interesting topic. And maybe that might be your next book. But I love the story of TVA. I love the story of a region of our country struggling so badly that the rest of the country says, yeah, they're having a hard time. We need to help them out. And in today's atmosphere, I don't believe the TVA ever would have been started because I'm just basically listening and watching the news as it is today. And, there's so much deregulation going on. Now, I'm not a big fan of overregulation of anything. And do I think that there are places where money's being wasted and misspent? Of course. But when we talk about deregulation of so many things, I mean, when we do away, if they do away with OSHA, who really truly is going to watch out for the workers then? I mean, it's no one.
No one. And Tennessee, we hate workers in this state. Our laws are set up to our laws are set up to hurt workers. And this is kind of wonky, but Governor Bill Lee, who I think has been an incredibly harmful governor to our state, he got involved. First started to get involved in politics over what they called tort reform in the early 2000s, and Bill Frist was part of this too, where they were saying, oh, there's all these frivolous lawsuits. People we can't make any money because all these frivolous lawsuits. So they put all these laws in the books that made it very, very hard for workers to sue companies for harm on the job site, right? In the Kingston work, these laws were passed in the early 2000s. The Kingston workers ran into these laws. There's a law called the Silica Claims Act in Tennessee where it basically limits a worker's ability to sue his employer if they're exposed to silica, which silica is like in everything. It's in sand. It's one of the most abundant substances on Earth. Well, it's also a big part of fly ash because it's a big part of everything. Like I said, it's in sand, it's in concrete, it's in dirt, whatever. Well, the workers had to. I won't get too much in the weeds, but the workers ran into some of these tort reform laws, the silica law, that were a direct result of like this wave of anti-worker legislation that got passed, 20 years ago.
And was the silica law, was that originally because the car manufacturer said they were getting too many lawsuits from their workers?
A lot of it has to do with construction.
Construction, that's what it was.
A lot of it's like construction.
Yeah. I knew there was some big lobbying group.
Construction sites, because
yeah. And the big lobby group said,
so we hate.
I'm sorry. The big lobby group for the construction companies said, "Oh yeah, we got to do something about this." And so, as it goes in Tennessee, and I'm sure in lots of other states as well, the lobby groups are kind of pulling all the strings, and in this case, they're actually making a law that hurts workers and says, "No, you can't sue if you're exposed to this." It is a concern that that we are going to do too much deregulation and just basically leave corporations in charge. And corporations are designed to make money. So if protecting the workers means they're not making as much money, which side of that do we think they're going to go down on? They're going to go on the make more money side, of course.
Yeah, we hate blue collar workers in this country, especially on the right.
And it is sad. A lot of these jobs are very dangerous that people are doing, and they do need some oversight, and they need some laws and regulations that are actually enforced. Well, Jared, I'll tell you what, you have really hit a home run. I guess this is your first book. Is that right?
This is, yeah. I've written a lot of magazine stories, but this is my first full length.
Well, I just don't think it's going to be your last book.
We'll see. I don't know what's next. I enjoyed getting to know these characters so well. I say characters, these real humans, like Janie Clark and Jim Scott. I'll have to. I'm gonna take a break before I jump into forming these close bonds with other people to write another book. But I will write another one. I may write a novel next. I may write a polemic. I'm not really sure. We'll see.
Well, and you bring up sort of an interesting point. It is true, and I can sense in the book that when you really get to know these people so well, then you hurt for them because it didn't turn out very well for some of them. And poor Janie, I mean, she lost her husband, and it wasn't just like something that happened overnight. Many of these families have struggled and still are struggling with these horrible health issues. And these men can't work any longer. I mean, it's affected so many things in their families, and I do sense in the book that you truly cared about these people. So I know that that's a hard load to carry around, and you need a break.
I didn't. I mean, to be sure, I didn't endure anything close to what these families endured. But yeah, I got to know these families and these people over 5 years. I remember exactly where I was. I was at the Kroger on Columbia Avenue, and I got the text message that Ansel Clark had collapsed on his floor and was dying basically. And I went to his funeral, and I'm not a character in the book. I'm on the I referred to on the very last page. I referred that Janie got a call from a writer friend, and that's me. And that's the only time in the whole book that I make any sort of appearance. It's kind of a veiled appearance at that. But yeah, it was taxing. I also had 2 kids and while writing and reporting it too. So I tried to be present as a father, but it was a lot of nights and weekends away from my kids, writing and reporting this. So I'm glad I did it. My wife is very supportive of it. I'm glad that there's now a record of what happened. But I think I may write a novel next, so I have to. I need like some space. I need like some space before I do another book kind of like this.
Yeah, well, but you write a novel, you'll fall in love with your made-up characters. So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, you've gotten some great reviews, and I know the book sales are going well. I want to hold it up again. I want to encourage everyone to get your copy of this book. John Grisham's got nothing on you. I'm telling you, this is.
Well, thank you.
And it's so interesting because it is real, and you sprinkle a few pictures throughout the book of these real people, and so it's I just really think it's going to be a great made-for-TV movie. I mean, I'm surprised that no one's done that. Crossed. I'm surprised.
Yeah, it got optioned in 2021 for Hollywood twice. But my agent's I have a Hollywood agent. He's taking it out again. So I'm hoping something comes up at this time. We'll see. I think I would love to see it on the screen because that would just expose more people to what happened and also let them know about TVA. So I'm crossing my fingers. I'd love for that to happen.
Well, and Matthew McConaughey really needs to play the lead attorney.
Yeah, he'd be great.
He's got the accent and everything. He's got the mannerisms. I think it would just be perfect,
yeah, he'd be fun.
Yeah, and if they need a character who's an old lady with a really deep Southern accent, I'm available.
You'd be great, Peggy.
I'm available. Well, thank you so much for being with us today on Blue Lift. I want to have you back again because I know you're involved in some politics. You and I have made a little good trouble together, and I have a feeling we might be able to do some more of that in the coming days and weeks and months. But yeah, I would love to have you back when some of the things I think that are going to be happening with our Tennessee legislature as well as up in D.C. that are going to even erode the rights of workers even further. We'll have you back, and we'll get into the weeds of some of that stuff and why some of that is bad. Now, if someone wants to keep up with you, where can they do that, Jared?
That's a good question. I have an email sign up on my website. My website is jr-sullivan.com. That'd be a good one. I will probably send you one email a year maybe about what I have going on. But I'm also on Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff too.
And you do a good job on your socials. I like the way that you tackle some political issues, both local and national, and I enjoy seeing that. So yeah, you're on the good side of things.
I try to lean in with the data to show people
exactly
behind.
And I'm all emotion. I'm all emotion on there. I'm just emotional about everything.
Well, it drives me crazy when our local representatives here in Tennessee talk about how great they are at managing our economy. I just want to say, our per capita GDP is like significantly lower than all the states you make fun of or denigrate all the time. They live long. People on average in blue states live 15 to 20 years longer than people in Tennessee. They have higher levels of education. So like I feel like I feel like that's seeing that stuff really seeing those numbers really solidified my view on some of these things. But I also feel like they could do the same for other people, seeing like, oh yeah, like Tennessee, like as much as our conservatives leaders talk about how great they are at managing their economy, they're actually pretty bad at it.
Oh yeah, and the infant mortality rate is higher. I mean, there's so many areas where we're way below the midline, and yet we act like everything is great. But it's up to us progressives to get the message out there more, because I think the average Tennessean truly does believe all the things that they hear, that everything is so great here when it's not.
I mean, have me on to talk about the economy sometime. I mean, I cover now for my day job. I write about economics and finance, so I would love to wonk out and get in the weeds with you about Tennessee's economy going back to the Civil War. It's kind of the same as it ever was. We're in an extractive economy, and it keeps us behind. So anyway, that's a conversation for another day.
Awesome. Well, we'll do that. That sounds like that would be a great show. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and listeners, thank you. And I want you to go out and get yourself a copy of this book. And
Valley So Low, yeah.
Yeah, Valley So Low. Get by the fireplace and just open it up and read it. And again, it's just a great story. That is factual and is true, and you just read it and you think, how could this really have happened? Well, it really did happen, and so you need to get yourself a copy of it. Check out Jared on his website. We'll put all of that in the show notes for you, and then he's also on the socials. So thank you so much, Jared, for being a part of Blue Lift.
Thank you, Peggy. Glad to be here.
All right, bye-bye.